Check, check. Okay.
Check, check. 1, 2, 3.
All right. Well, good evening and welcome. My name is Joshua Olson, and I am a critical care registered nurse with Mainline Health. And I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. It is truly a privilege to be able to share what we hope will be some helpful information, some resources, and some ideas that hopefully will be beneficial to everyone. We realize that mental health can be a difficult topic and a complex one. So throughout the seminar, if you have a question that comes to mind, you can text your questions to 484-791-2598. And we would welcome your questions. We're going to have a Q&A after the presentation, and we would love to answer any questions that you might have. First, if you are here and listening and are struggling with depression and anxiety, maybe fear or hopelessness, or maybe even suicidal thoughts, we want to let you know that you are not alone and you are not without hope or help. In fact, I myself have dealt with crippling depression and anxiety. As an ICU nurse, I was starting a new job in February of 2020, so right before the pandemic broke. And I was just coming off orientation, and I found myself having to enter into isolation rooms, not knowing if I would get COVID, if I would die, if I would bring it home and possibly infect my family, and maybe possibly lose a family member. And then on top of that, I would find myself standing at the bedside of people who were struggling to breathe as they were taking their last breaths, all alone. No family, no friends, just me and them. And I would hold their hand, and I would pray with them, and I would sing to them, and that was it. On top of that, we didn't have enough PPE, so we had to reuse our N95 masks day after day. We had to reuse isolation gowns. Basically, it was overwhelming. It was depressing and anxiety-provoking. I started developing panic attacks and persistent depression. And the panic attacks were interesting. They wouldn't necessarily happen when I was at work. It would happen when I would come home to my family, and I would just be spending time with them. And all of a sudden, I would have this tightness in my chest, and I would feel like someone's sitting on me and having difficulty getting breath. Well, thankfully, I was able to find an excellent therapist or counselor and a medical doctor who was knowledgeable in antidepressant medications, and I was able to find help during that time that I was struggling. And that's what we want for you. If you are struggling, we want you to know that there is help and that you can receive that help. I want to tell a story about a man and his wife. Actually, two stories. The man gets out his ladder and he goes to the side of his house and he puts the ladder up and he needs to clean out his gutters. So he puts the ladder up on the side of the house and starts climbing so he can clean out his gutters. Well, he accidentally falls and he hears a crack. And his wife heard that, and she runs outside and says, "Are you okay?" Oh my goodness. She looks down and she notices that his leg is broken. And she's like, "Your leg is broken. We need to call 911. We need to get you to the hospital. We need to get you medicine. They need to set your leg and put a cast on it. That's what you need." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me." And she's like, "No, your leg is broken and you need to get help." And he's like, "No, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't know what you're talking about." And he crawls into the house because he can't walk. He gets on his couch and his phone rings and he has to crawl over and he misses the call. And his wife is like, "Listen, there is something wrong." And he just says, "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." So that's story number one. Story number two, very similar. There's a man goes to his garage and he gets a ladder and he puts it up on the side of the house because he needs to clear out his gutters. And he climbs the ladder and he slips and he breaks his leg. He looks down, he sees that his leg is broken and he's like, "Ah!" And his wife comes out and he's like, "My leg, it's broken. Oh, can you call 911? I need to get to the hospital. My leg is broken. It's agonizing. I need help." And she's like, "What's wrong with you? Like, just get up and clear out the gutters and be done with it. You should be able to get up. You're a healthy person. Come on, get up." And he's like, "No, I need help. My leg is broken." And she's like, "No, you're fine. You're an absolutely healthy person. You should be able to get up and clear out the gutters." Well, obviously, this is very silly, right? And that's because there is no stigma behind having a broken leg. But just as it should be obvious when a man breaks his leg that he would ask for help and that his wife would immediately call emergency services and he would get an x-ray and he would receive medicine and they would set the fracture and put the leg in a cast. Just as it's that obvious, it should be just as normal and just as obvious for a person to admit to a loved one that they're feeling down, that they're struggling to find any motivation to get out of bed. And just as normal for someone to notice if a friend or family member hasn't been themselves and are curious enough to ask, "How are you doing?" It should be just as normal for each of us to reach out to the lonely, the hurting, and the downcast and to ask them, "How are you doing? And how can I help you find help?" So what we want you to come away with is just like it's okay to have a broken leg. It happens. Sometimes you slip off a ladder and you break your leg, and that's okay. You go and you get it fixed. And guess what? Our bodies are amazing and it can heal in several weeks. It's okay if you are struggling with a mental health condition. And I want you to hear this. It is okay. We want to be stigma-free. So what is stigma? Stigma is when someone views a person in a negative way just because they have a mental health condition. Some people describe stigma as feeling shame or judgment from someone else. Stigma can even come from an internal place where you confuse feeling bad with being bad. And so you actually are judging yourself. And navigating life with a mental health condition can be tough. And the isolation, blame, and secrecy that is often encouraged by stigma creates huge challenges to someone reaching out and getting the help and the support that they need. So learning how to avoid and address stigma is important for all of us, especially when you realize just how powerful stigma can be. People experiencing mental health conditions often face rejection, bullying, and discrimination. And this can make their journey to recovery longer and more difficult. Mental health conditions are the leading cause of disability in the United States. Even though most people can be successfully treated for their mental health condition, less than half of adults in the United States who need mental health services and treatment actually receive help. And there's an average delay between mental health symptoms and intervention. And you know how long it is? It's 8 to 10 years. 8 to 10 years. And friends, this should not be so. It should be okay to not be okay. And if you want, you can go to NAMI, I say it wrong all the time, National Alliance on Mental Illness, their website, and you can actually pledge to be stigma-free, to say, listen, I am not going to contribute to this, so that if someone I care about, it won't be 8 to 10 years before they get help. I will put an end to this. And I would encourage you to do that. Well, let's look at some numbers. Among adolescents, 12 to 17 years old, or teenagers, 1 in 6 experience a major depressive episode in a year. Over 3 million teenagers had thoughts of suicide this past year. And there has been, over the last few years, a 31% increase in mental health-related emergency room visits for teenagers. So you, if you are a teenager, or are teenagers, are experiencing a mental health crisis. And they know it. Over half of teenagers that were surveyed stated that more should be done to address mental health for teenagers in America. Over half. Sorry, next slide. Over 50% of all adolescents have some mental health disorder. Over 50%. And this seems to increase as the adolescent ages into adulthood. So you can kind of see here on the right side, you have 13 to 14, 15 to 16, and then 17 to 18. And each one is progressively higher. So as they reach adulthood, teenagers are facing more and more difficulties with their mental health. It seems to be fairly evenly spread between the sexes, with females just a little bit topping the males, 51% to 48%. Again, that is half of all teenagers. Half. And over 22%, 1 in 5 teenagers have a severe mental health illness. 22%. So if you were in a classroom with a teenager and you would count out 5 students, one of them is struggling with a severe mental health illness, and half of them, so 2 or 3 of them, would have some sort of mental health condition. And friends, it's also okay to talk about suicide. It's not a pleasant subject. nor should it be. And it's tough. But asking about suicide may save someone's life, and then it would be worth it. About 2 times more females attempt suicide than males, which is interesting because 4 times more males actually die by suicide. This means that although females attempt suicide more, males are more likely to find a way that is, in fact, lethal. This is most frequently attributed to the fact that males will use firearms when they're attempting suicide. There were about 46,000 Americans who died by suicide last year. That's 130 suicides per day. A little over 10% of all adults have had thoughts of suicide. And 1.2 million Americans attempted suicide last year. And again, around 10 to 11 years is the average delay between symptoms and treatment. And perhaps if someone was struggling with depression and they received the treatment that they needed, it would not lead to the point where they feel like they need to escape by suicide. There is 1 in 5 people in America who have a mental illness. That's 20%. So if you can count any 5 people next to you, one of them has a mental health condition. And more than likely, this number is grossly underestimated. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 14. 10 to 14. These are young kids. It's the third leading cause of death for people ages 15 through 24. 79% of all people who actually commit suicide are male. And people who are within the LGB community are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight counterparts. So people who struggle with being different, or maybe excluded or feeling excluded, are more likely to try to commit suicide than people who might feel accepted. Transgender people are 9 times more likely to attempt suicide. 9 times more likely if you struggle with gender dysphoria. The annual prevalence of serious thoughts of suicide breaks down like this: 5% of all adults, 11.3% of young adults, 18 to 25. About 20% of high school students have had serious thoughts of suicide. And just about half of the LGBTQ youth have had serious thoughts about suicide. So as you can see, this is more common than maybe you would like to admit. Maybe you are struggling, and it's very difficult for you to admit. Maybe you are that person who needs someone to ask, "How are you doing?" And so I do, right now. How are you doing? If you need help, we want to connect with you. You can either text a question or just text, "I need help," to the number on the screen, 484-791-2598. And John and I would be glad to help you. We would love to be able to try and help you find the help that you need. And now I'd like to invite John Sovokol up to talk a little bit more specifically about mental health conditions.
Thank you, Josh. Those numbers are pretty sobering. And as someone who has worked in the mental health field for about 15 years now and swam in these waters, I have names and faces that I can put to some of these stats. And it's really, it's still sobering to see. I appreciated Josh's vulnerability with his own struggles with mental health. I've certainly had my struggles with anxiety and depression at times too. And I'm intentionally using that word vulnerable because without vulnerability, this seminar would not do us much good. So what do I mean by that? Well, two things. Unless someone is willing to actually be vulnerable and share that they're struggling with something, they're going to continue to suffer silently and alone. And anytime someone says, I struggle with depression or I am suicidal, they're taking a risk, a huge risk, taking a risk of maybe being judged or invalidated. Oh, it's not that bad, like the wife said in the second scenario. No, you're fine, you're good, you're not really that depressed, you're not going to take your life. The risk of getting bad advice. Oh, well, you know what? My aunt went through that, and she tried this, and she was fine, so maybe you should do that too. You just never know how someone's going to respond if you share something like this. It is different than saying, I was sick last week with the flu, or my ankle's bothering me. And so it's vulnerable and risky to share. But there's another element to vulnerability in this equation here that we're talking about tonight, and that's that the listener themselves must be vulnerable. And what I mean by that is that to listen, I mean really listen and talk about someone's depression and where it is dark and lonely and painful. It can feel like you're going into this dark, deep, pitch black cave that you've never been into before. You don't have a flashlight, you don't have your phone, so you can't flip on the flashlight mode. And you're walking around and you don't know what you're going to bump into. You don't know if anything's living in there. You just don't know what you're going to encounter. And it's kind of like that when you're walking into a conversation with someone who struggles with these things. You don't know what you're going to find out. And it's a little scary. I will admit, even as a counselor, it can be a little scary when some of these topics come up. And so, to say to someone, tell me what it's like for you to live with depression, that can be a vulnerable question to ask someone. And we all might be tempted to just, say, let's get out of this cave as quickly as possible. Let's not talk about this too much. Or we might be tempted to just not go into the cave at all and not ask any questions. Or, this is another way that people avoid these conversations, they might just try to give a quick bit of advice. Oh, why don't you get on some medication? I've got to run, but I hope it goes well. Good luck. Being with someone in the darkness, sitting with them with it, is hard. And so in my 15 years as a counselor, and having spent all that time trying to best figure out how can I help people who are suffering, I'm still learning. I'm still growing in that. I will never stop growing in that. But what we're talking about right now is the most important thing that I think you're going to hear come out of my mouth tonight. You will not know what kind of help your friend or your family member will need until you take the time to be with them and sit with them and learn from them and hear what it's like for them to go through whatever it is that they're going through. And if that sounds a little terrifying, I'm seeing some grim looks on people's faces right now. If that seems terrifying, I've got good news. You don't actually need to be a trained counselor to listen and to sit with someone. Your friend or your family member doesn't even need to, they might need a trained professional, right? I'm not discounting that. But they don't need you to be that in that moment. They don't need advice. They don't need to tell them what to do. They just need you to listen and to be with them. They first need you to be willing to come into the darkness of what they're going through and to be with them for a bit, not forever, but for a bit, and to descend down into that. And perhaps to tell them, I don't even know what to say right now to you, but I'm just glad that you're telling me about this. That's a really good line, by the way. If you like it, you can write it down. It's a Brene Brown line, so I can't even take credit for it. I don't even know what to say. I'm just glad you told me. It's a great thing to say. And then just be quiet. So yes, I do want you to walk out of these doors tonight with the ability to recognize the symptoms of depression and suicide. We'll get into that. And to know it when you see it. And also, I want you to know how to guide someone to the right resources, right? Josh and I are going to talk about that as well. So we will give you some things to point to. But first, let's take a look at a painting by Pablo Picasso. Thank you. Some of you may know that Picasso had a blue period where he painted for several years, and his works included predominantly the color blue. And he began this period of his paintings when his good friend Carlos died, coincidentally enough, by suicide. So I want you to just take a moment and look at this painting. And as you look at it, I just want a few of you, if you can, to please just share what you notice when you look on the screen. What do you notice about this painting? What jumps out at you? Sad. Yeah, she is sad. Yes. She's peering down, her arms are crossed, and she's introverted. Yeah, she's like pulled within herself. Yes. Yeah, like a blank, apathetic look on her face. Yes. Anger. Yes, it's not so easy to see that. Yeah, those brows. Yeah. Yeah, it does look like she's sitting in the corner, doesn't it? I showed this because I feel like it's an embodiment of some sort of some of the things that we're talking about with depression. You can see it in a way that my words or Josh's words probably can't fully portray. The definition of depression is, and tell me if this seems to resonate with what you see here, feelings of severe despondency and dejection. And we can almost feel that in this painting, can't we? So let me run through some symptoms of depression here. When at least for something to reach the threshold of clinical depression, at least 5 of these symptoms on your screen need to be present for a period of 2 weeks, right? So not over a year where, January I felt this way, and February I felt that, but within a 2-week period, right? This would be clinical depression. So we've got Sad, empty, hopeless is one. We saw that on her face. Less interest in activities. Significant weight loss or weight gain. Sleeping too much or too little. Feelings of worthlessness. Hard to think or concentrate. That's one that's not always thought about with depression. Suicidal thoughts. And the depression, in order to qualify as clinical depression, it needs to interfere with someone's life, maybe with their work, with their job, with their school, in some significant way. We can see in these symptoms that depression, it's more than just feeling down, right, like Eeyore. It can affect how we sleep, how much we eat, how much we enjoy activities or hobbies. Depression can affect our weight, our energy levels, and our thoughts. And so it's something it's more than just a mood. It's something that can affect so many different areas of our life. And I want to highlight that because as you walk through life and rub shoulders and elbows with people, you are going to sometimes see some of these things. And maybe it is symptomatic of depression, and maybe it's not. But it's something to be on the lookout for. And I think it is noteworthy that women traditionally are more likely to report depression versus men. It's a weakness of us guys. And women not only will report depression, but more of the classic traditional symptoms of a depressed mood or sadness. Whereas guys, if they are going to report feeling something, they're more likely to report that they're irritable or angry. Right? It's just more, it shows up that way. Which is interesting that a male commented on how, that painting, there was more anger there. I didn't think about that till now. But yeah, there's something about guys that's how it presents more often. So let's take a look at some risk factors for depression, right? So if someone has one of these risk factors, it does not mean that they're going to develop depression by any stretch, right? But it could make someone more susceptible or vulnerable to depression. All right, so a stressful life event, right? So this could include, I think I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, that's okay. I don't have it on your slides. I apologize about that. So a stressful life event is our first factor here, and that could be the death of a loved one is a common one, losing a job, a divorce, money issues, relationship stress. I do a lot of couples counseling, and one thing I've learned is that the stressed couples are 25 times more likely to experience depression. 25 times more likely, which is tough. Another factor is family history, right? There's just some genetic predisposition that some people have, where if you did a family tree, you could see depression running all the way through great-great-parents, grandparents, parents, aunts, and uncles. You can just see that thread running through. There also can be like a chemical imbalance where, maybe someone's life circumstances are fine. Nothing's really going wrong with them. But there is just an organic, natural chemical imbalance that's present for them that other people don't have. Severe medical illnesses are another big one, especially if it's prolonged or chronic or ongoing. That really can be tough for someone to have to deal with that day after day after day. Another factor can be personality traits or negative thinking, meaning maybe someone is always looking at the glass half full, or they really have struggles with like taking in a positive experience or taking in a compliment, right? It just kind of, it's like water off a duck's back in a way. It doesn't sink in for them. They just tend to focus more on the negative things. That can make someone a little bit more likely to lean towards depression symptoms. And then lastly, we have substance abuse. That's a big factor for depression and for suicide, as we'll see later too. But it's tricky because we don't really know causality when it comes to depression and substance abuse, right? If you're abusing a substance, you're sort of changing your biology a little bit, right? And that can, alcohol, for example, is a depressant. So the substance abuse might come first before the depression. Or maybe someone's depressed and they just want to change how they feel, they want to escape, and so they might be more likely to turn to a substance. So you can see that what comes first, the chicken or egg, can be a little hard to discern sometimes. So the more factors that people have of all these risk factors that I just mentioned, the more the deck is stacked against them, right? The more likely it is that they could struggle with depression. And depression does not always travel alone, meaning there can be other mental health struggles that kind of like a caboose attach themselves onto the depression. It's not uncommon to see anxiety coincide with depression. That's very common, whether it's like social anxiety, panic attacks, or OCD. We also see eating disorders, more so in women, but for men as well. Alcohol, substance abuse. 1 in 3 depressed people will also suffer from some form of substance abuse or dependence. 1 in 3. Suicide. More people who are depressed. Most people who are depressed won't die from suicide. That's good, but being depressed does make you more likely that you might have suicidal thoughts. And lastly, we have intentional self-harm. And the studies studying teenagers are pretty sobering, where we see 17% of teenagers have engaged at some point with intentional self-harm. And it's not just depression. No, anxiety can also be a factor in making someone susceptible to self-harm. There are several treatments out there for those types of behaviors. Dialectical behavior therapy is one that I've received a lot of training in, or DBT, and I've seen that be really helpful with that. I think it's also worth mentioning bipolar disorder briefly here. In case for those who aren't familiar with it, bipolar disorder is a condition in which someone kind of experiences swings between mania or hypomania and depression, and they go through different seasons of that. So in mania, there's more energy, more euphoria, excitement. They might talk a little bit faster. There's a lot of creativity. Artists can sometimes produce their best work in this time period. And if we see the manic symptoms, and then we also later will see the depression symptoms, that could be an indicator that someone is experiencing symptoms of bipolar disorder. And one of my clients who I work with who has been diagnosed with bipolar had a really poignant way of describing it. They said it is her disorder is the pendulum that wrecks me, particularly when it swings down into the depression. It's the pendulum that wrecks me, which is tough. So if someone is experiencing, let's say, some low-grade depression, right? Like every mental health disorder is on a spectrum where symptoms can be really intense and severe to very light or maybe barely at all, right? And everything in between. So let's talk about someone who's more on that low-grade side of depression. Maybe it's not having a huge impact on their school performance or their work. They're navigating their relationships pretty well. We want to talk about some practical helps that might be useful. But before I get to that, if on the other hand someone is experiencing some pretty serious depression, right? Like their motivation is shot, it's hard to complete schoolwork, work, they're not functioning well in their relationships, then that's a good indicator that you might want to look into some counseling or maybe some medication management and get that support as soon as possible. Medication can help depression. It doesn't always remove all the symptoms, and certainly not right away, but it can help remove like some of that fog that can be there for depression. It can kind of sort of clear some of that out so that if there is more deeper underlining stuff, like maybe grief work that is unresolved or whatever that might be, the counseling can kind of get into that because some of that fog has been cleared out a little bit. It typically takes, if an antidepressant is going to be effective, about 4 to 6 weeks for it to take hold. I remember hearing one person talk about their mental health struggles as if they were on a boat, and that boat had sprung a leak. and they, tried bailing the water out. The water kept coming in. They tried all sorts of different strategies and things. Nothing could stop that water from coming on. And then they were able to get on to a medication regimen that helped, and it actually plugged that hole, and they stopped taking on water. It's not the case for everyone, but for some that is. And so I just wanted to put that out there for folks. So again, returning back to this idea of that not everyone's depressive symptoms are going to be on that high severe end. So what are some things that we can do if we're not quite needing medication, but some practical things that could help maybe lift some of that melancholiness? All right, so exercise is the one you hear all the time. You guys have probably all heard that, right? Depression does affect the body. It doesn't just affect the mind or our mood. It does those things too, but our body too, and it creates a lethargy. And exercise can be a good way to kind of push through some of that, release some endorphins, if you will. And the winter, this time is always a tough time for me. And last winter, I actually started running a little regularly through the winter, and that really was helpful for me quite a bit. A sun lamp that is at least 10,000 lux can be especially helpful also in the winter, right? Because we're not seeing the sun as much. It's shorter days, it's colder, and that sun gives us vitamin D. It re-energizes us, and so it can be really helpful to have a sun lamp and get some exposure to that. Maybe it would help to speak to a doctor about our diet or some supplements that could be really useful. I know something like vitamin D can be helpful. But talk to your doctor about that. I'm not a doctor. Get a physical, right? A lot of times depression can have medical causes, like we said earlier. Probably one of the more well-known medical conditions that can cause depression is hypothyroidism. If that's what you're dealing with, then let's treat that and not go on an antidepressant right away, right? So getting a physical can be a wise thing to do. Talking to friends, being intentional, pushing yourself. You're not going to want to. Depression makes you want to pull within yourself and shrink your social circle. So to push oneself to talk to friends and experience their presence is invaluable. And balanced sleep is also super helpful, right? And also lowering stress levels. And that lowering stress levels and balanced sleep is particularly helpful for folks with bipolar disorder to avoid going into a depressive, episode. I mean, lowering stress levels and balanced sleep is good for all of us, but it's particularly strategic for folks in that category and just helping them kind of stay more balanced. Okay, we doing all right? I know this is not the funnest topic to talk. I mean, it'd be probably funner to talk about cryptocurrency. Oh wait, that might make some of us depressed too, actually. Scratch that. All right, let's stick to depression and suicide. So let's get into suicide, an even more somber topic here. Raise a hand if you know someone who's attempted or completed suicide in your life. Yeah, it is real, and Josh's numbers back that up, right? The three mental health diagnoses that we see most often with suicide are, we see depression, of course, major depression or bipolar depression, alcohol or some sort of substance abuse, and schizophrenia is the third diagnosis that we see most often with it. And so if we see someone with some combination of these things, then that's something we really want to be careful of. We want to make sure that they're getting help, make sure that we're checking in with them, right, walking alongside them. With suicide, I think this quote by Anne Voskamp is revealing. She says, "We could tell you what we know, that depression is like a room engulfed in flames. You can't breathe, for the sooty smoke smothering you limp. And suicide is deciding there's no way but to jump straight out of the burning building." I'm going to skip down a little bit. You don't try to kill yourself because that's appealing, but because life's agonizing. We don't want to die, but we can't stand to be devoured. And suicide often occurs when someone reaches the point where they feel like they just don't have a good option. And it feels like jumping is the best option. And I think that's important to know when we come into contact with someone who might be experiencing suicidal ideation. It's probably not something that just happened recently, but something that they've been fighting and wrestling with and thinking about for a period of time. Josh gave us a lot of stats on this. And suicide affects people of all ages and backgrounds. Like, there's no typical background for folks who attempt suicide. The greatest risk for suicide is when folks are younger, in the adolescence and early years. We're seeing kids as young as 8 to 10 attempt and sometimes complete suicide, which makes me shudder, to be honest. It's just getting younger and younger. And, with suicide risk factors for teenagers, there's all sorts of things that can be there for people. Perfectionism, right? It can hit any of us. Even as adults, we don't want to mess up. But when you're in school or on a sports team and you're seeing other people doing things better than you are, that's tough. Or when you see yourself making a mistake or not getting the right grade, right? That can hit pretty hard. Josh mentioned the LGBTQ community and how that is a huge risk factor for suicide. Depression and anxiety and other mental health disorders as well. Substance abuse, we've touched on. History of sexual and physical abuse, that's a big one. If someone has trauma in their background, that absolutely can make them more susceptible to that, or even any sort of adverse events. If you're interested, you can check out the ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. There's an interesting YouTube video on that and how certain categories, if a child has gone through that, it's really sobering. Not just the medical challenges that they'll experience later in life, but also the mental health challenges. Low self-esteem, of course, so tough to navigate as a teenager. Academic struggles, right? Getting low grades can be hard. Lacking social and family support. And that support network is so huge for people as a protective factor. Family history of suicide. There's some families, again, you look at their family tree and you can trace it through there. And then suicide clusters as well. So let's maybe shift to something that maybe can be a little bit more practical in helping to understand if someone is struggling with suicide. So you see PALS. Initially, my acronym was SLAP, which is SLAP. But Josh and I agreed that PAL sounds a lot nicer. So we worked that around a little bit. And this is an acronym to help you remember some important questions to ask someone, a friend, a family member, if you think they might be thinking about suicide. Right? We have this in your resource handout. So you don't have to remember it or write it down. So the P is plan, right? This is what you want to ask about first. If you are walking with someone and maybe you're getting that spidey sense that they're really struggling and going through it, you're seeing some of the symptoms or risk factors that we talked about earlier, you might want to ask them, hey, have you ever thought about, or do you have a plan to attempt suicide? I know that might sound strange for me to ask you that, but I just want to put that out there. And how and when would you attempt suicide if they say yes, right? Probably most people have not asked that question, but we have to be able to ask it when the time is right. We have to be able to ask that question. Easier for me to say as a trained therapist, but I just want that to sink in so badly. If we have these 8, 10, 12-year gaps where people are experiencing the onset of something, and there's that long of a gap between their seeking treatment, we have to be willing to get in there with people sometimes, to shrink that down. So that's plan. The L is lethality, the A is accessibility. I can't spell. Do they have something that they could get their hands on easily? Is it accessible? If they're thinking about a gun, for instance, is there a gun in their house? Is it available to them, or is it in a gun safe? Do they know the lock, right? Like, things like that. We want to understand that because that's an important factor when we're thinking about how much danger someone is in. We want to think about L, lethality, and how deadly is their plan. There's some people have told me their plan, and then I won't get into specifics, but I'm like, okay, this is serious that they're thinking about suicide, but that plan is not going to work. So that kind of, can make someone feel a little bit more at ease as you weigh all these things. And then the S is for that support system that I mentioned a minute ago. Who else in their life knows that they're struggling with this and can offer support? If there's no one, that's a huge risk factor. That's scary. But they have a counselor who they're already talking about with us, or they have other friends that know about this and are walking with them, or maybe their parents know. That's a good thing. So I wish I could say these questions, this PALS acronym, it will serve as a crystal ball, and you'll be able to tell with certainty, yes, I can see that you will not attempt suicide before I see you next week. It's not how it works. Even as trained therapists, it's murky sometimes. This is where counseling, being a soft science, is, it's just the reality of things. And so we have to weigh these things out. And I know that's not what people want to hear. If there was like some sort of easy test or thing that we could swab their tongue, right, and just know, it would be so nice. But, it's important to know that oftentimes with suicide, if you're looking for more, okay, what else will help me understand how desperate someone might be? It's important to understand that people who do attempt suicide, this isn't always the case, but often there's something precipitating the attempt that happened right before, something big, right? Loss of job, divorce, some of the things that we mentioned earlier about the risk factors, something that might have happened right before, and also something that would have happened in their history, maybe in the years past as well. An example of this, just meeting with someone this week, and they experienced a recent death in their family, and that was hard, but they also experienced another death of another person that was very dear to them several years before that. And so it's like the compounding factor of those two things really had them in a tough spot this week. So that's something that we want to keep an eye out for. Something in the past that maybe happened in before, and something that's happening right now. Okay, so what do we do if we do find out that our friend or family member really is struggling with some thoughts of suicide? We've gone through our PALS acronym with them. We're nervous. The hair on the back of our neck is sticking up a little bit. Okay, great. Good job getting to this point. You're probably mad at me for helping you get to this point, but you're here. Now what do you do? All right, so now let's have the rubber meet the road a little bit more, right? So the first thing I would want you to think about is there someone else that we can pull in, someone else that should know about this person's situation, right? Whether it's a guidance counselor, a parent, another friend, if someone's in counseling, any of those things. If you work at a school or even a healthcare facility, there might be like some regulations on who to reach out to. So I would encourage you to think about that first. Is there someone that we can pull in right now that needs to be a part of this conversation? I know that's not always easy to do. The second thing that I would want you to do is to think about, okay, how do we, if they need support and help, how do we reach out? How do we get in contact with that support? And maybe it's someone who's like it's a situation where you're like, I don't feel comfortable even leaving this person right now. Like, the situation is so concerning and the crisis is so strong. Like, I don't know if I'm going to see them next week if I leave them right now. Right? So let's say it's like that intense of a situation. I don't wish that on anyone, but if that's the case, I want you to have some resources here, right? And if you want to plug some of these numbers into your phone, I encourage you to do that. So let's say you're in Chester County, all right? A great resource to know about is the Valley Creek Crisis Center. Now, the Valley Creek Crisis Center is contracted by the county of Chester to provide all sorts of resources. There is, you can call them up. They've got a hotline right there that you can talk to someone. You can go in, you can walk into their center, and people will be there to provide triage and assessments. They even have a mobile crisis team that will come out to your location pretty quickly and to do an assessment right there. So if you forget, pal, slap, what did John say? I don't remember. Let's just call this number, put it in your phone, I encourage you, and hey, let's call this up. We're going to get some support right now. And they even have a unit that is kind of like a hospital diversion program, right? If someone is really needing support, really needing monitoring, they have like a 10-day program where someone can get the support they need without having to go inpatient, which is awesome. If you're in Montgomery County, on your resource sheet, we also have a number there as well. It would be a 24/7 hotline. It's free. There's no charge. A mobile crisis team can come out and assess. I wish they had these units years ago. Like, these can be the difference between life and death in some situations. And I hope it gives you a little bit of confidence that if I really don't know what to do, I can help someone get in contact with these resources. So if someone has a plan, they have a means to kill themselves, and they are giving clear signals that they have the intent to do it, or they can't commit to staying safe, we need to take action. We cannot just say, well, why don't you call your counselor or talk about this with them later in the week and walk away. We can't just say, here, text this hotline and hope that they'll do it. We need to make sure that they can get checked out by someone who really knows what they're doing, who can give a thorough assessment, and get them connected to the resources that they might really need in that moment. You might be that person that's just there for such a time as this. So I encourage you guys to take advantage of that. Plug those numbers in. Okay. You guys ready for a quick case study? All right. Let's see if you guys have been paying attention. All right. Let me read this off to you, and I want you to tell me what warning signs you see in this situation. What stands out to you? All right? All right, so for some of you, we're going to go back in time to high school, all right? Or maybe even middle school, whichever was funner for you. You play in your school's basketball team. After a loss, your teammate and friend is very upset. We're never going to win any more games, they say. This surprises you because your friend isn't usually like this. You try to remind them that there's plenty of season left and it's not over, but they don't want to hear it. This team is done. And they remain in a bad mood the whole rest of the bus trip home. Now, you know some things about your friend. You know that life isn't easy right now for them. Their friends are going through a divorce, or their parents are going through a divorce. And so the next day at lunch, you check in with them. They look tired, with bags under their eyes. And so you're talking to them about this, and they say, I don't want to talk to my parents. It's pointless. Their marriage is pointless. My family is pointless. My life feels pointless. Why bother if this is how life is going to be? Okay, so what stood out to you? What warning signs did you see? The tiredness and not sleeping right? Yeah. Despair. Yes. Yes. What else? Life is pointless, right? Like a hopelessness to them, right? Big life event, parents divorce, right? It's huge. There's our precipitating event right there. Yeah, right, right. Losing the game, which for some competitive people, not that I'm one of them, that can be a big deal, a huge deal. Right. Not themselves. This is a friend who's usually not like this, right? Doesn't get this upset. Very good, very good. Uh, I think that's all I had, but maybe someone had something else. Mm-hmm. No chance, never, right? Like that, again, that hopelessness that's just coming out in what they're saying. And there's such a pessimism to what they're saying, right? That negative thinking, right? Exactly. All right, so great. You guys saw these signs. That's awesome. What do you do? There's no real specific right answer I'm looking for. There's different ways that you can address this. I'm curious what some people might do. Yeah, great. That's a great way. Are you okay? Is there some depression or anxiety going on? I'm repeating in case some people are tuning in on the live stream. Yeah, excellent way to kind of, you know, break the ice a little bit and see if they can talk to you about that. Great. What else might people do? Yep. Yeah. Who else do you have in your life right now to talk about this? Can I be someone that can help you out with this? That's great right there. Are you talking about this with anyone else? I love that. Thank you. Maybe the coach could be someone. Right. Right. Yes. If the coach is someone who they have a good rapport with, that would be a great person to maybe bring into the loop. Good. Other thoughts? What else could we do? School counselor. Yeah. Yeah. Have you talked to so and so about this? Let's walk over right now. Yeah. Good. Any other thoughts? Yes. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Validating how hard it must be to go through a divorce. They are opening the door right at the end by what they're saying. Life, their marriage is pointless. Family is pointless. Like, there is an opportunity to be like, yeah, that is really hard. I am so sorry you were going through that. And just seeing if that can lead, and sometimes just let it hang. I am so sorry you were going through this. See what happens. See if that might be enough to open up the door a little bit. Or not, and then you ask another question. Right? Good. This is great. You guys are giving excellent. I'm very confident in this group right here. So the thing that I worry about the most is the silent sufferers, right? The ones who are less likely to share if they're with a group of people or with friends. They're just going to keep it in. Josh was talking about this earlier. And, you know, it makes me think of this quote by Dr. Kurt Thompson that I use a lot with my clients. My biggest problem isn't that I have problems, it's that I'm alone with them. My biggest problem isn't that I have problems, it's that I'm alone with them. And we humans do not do well when we suffer by ourselves. In fact, suffering in isolation is traumatizing. Whether it's a marriage, or a kid whose parents can't get their act together, or someone who has depression and doesn't know how to talk about it, or is silently having panic attacks and they don't know what's going on and they think people will think they're weird for sharing it. We don't do well when we are in isolation and we're not sharing it. And depression and suicidal thoughts are treatable. They are treatable. And I want people to hear that, because often it feels like there's no way out, right? It feels like nothing is going to change. And it's going to take hard work, but we don't want people to go about it and do this themselves. That is a recipe for us finding out, like, what? They took their life? I thought they were fine. I thought they were okay. You see it in the news so often, and I struggle with that. This stuff is treatable. It doesn't mean that going to counseling or going on medication is going to zap those symptoms altogether, right? But just like when it's cold out and I put my winter coat on, I'm still going to feel cold. But that coat can at least make the cold tolerable. It can at least allow me to hang in there and not go into hypothermia, right? And these are helps that can help pain be more endurable. And being a presence can help make that pain more endurable. So if you're here tonight or you're tuning in tonight, and I know you're here because you care, or because someone made you come, but you want to help. And to be a presence in the life of those who are walking through life with a limp is huge. Send them a text. Invite them over to dinner. Grab coffee with them, even if it's not convenient. Presence matters so much. And it's okay if you don't have the answers. And in fact, it's better for you to assume that you don't have the answers. Be slow to give advice. Be quick to listen. Okay, so as we mentioned, we do have several resources that Josh is going to go through before we have some time for some Q&A. Thank you, guys.
All right, we want to share with you a few resources that may help you find help, and a few things that you can even do now, like tonight, to help cope with some of the symptoms of depression and anxiety. And as John mentioned earlier, these exercises do not take the place of professional or medical treatment. If you are experiencing depression or anxiety that is affecting your daily life, you need to reach out for professional help. And I would encourage you to do that instead of these exercises. Again, if you have questions, I just want to point this out again. If you have questions, you can text them to 484-791-2598. So let's look at these resources. John kind of went through these. I'll just go in a little bit more detail. Moderate to high intensity exercise for about 30 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week seems to be like the magic amount to help you get those changes in your biochemistry, in your neurotransmitters that will help lift your mood. Early morning bright light exposure. So you want to try to get that bright light within 90 minutes of waking up, preferably to get outside. The sun is the best way to get that exposure. And if you can get outside, do that. Of course, it's very cold right now, and the sun does not like to shine during the winter. So as John pointed out, you can get one of these bright light lamps, and they'll say that they are 10,000 lux or more. And if you turn that on while you're getting ready in the morning for work or school, it has the same effect. It will help lift your mood. It will help kind of your body to produce those neurotransmitters that otherwise wouldn't because you're in the dark. So get a bright light. I have one at home. I love it. It works. Social connection. Spending intentional time with friends or loved ones. So if you are feeling alone, reach out. People love to be with other people. And so chances are, if you reach out and say, hey, can we get dinner? They're going to say, sure. When and where? So reach out. And the key is connection. You want to be able to connect. Perhaps you could join a club or a hobby group. And again, this is difficult when you feel depressed. It's so hard to press out of that inclination to go small and to hide and to not be seen. But if you can push past it and find that connection, it really can do a big difference. You can also check out a religious organization, a church, or a youth group. That's a great way to find connection with people who love to connect with other people. So resources for anxiety. So we can do some of these exercises together, actually. So the first one, when you're feeling anxious, and I was kind of feeling this way a little bit earlier today, getting ready for this seminar. One thing that I did is I looked around in my living room and I just noticed objects and I named them. That is a stuffed dog. That is a Christmas ornament. That is a book. And then it sounds really silly, but it has this way of just you telling yourself that you are here in a living room where you're safe has a grounding effect. You are safe. There's nothing to be afraid of. And as you name those objects, you can kind of feel it lift a little bit. The other thing you can do to center or ground is to kind of focus your attention. And maybe you can do this right now. Just close your eyes and focus your attention on the feeling of your legs and on your back and your bottom on the chair. Just focus on that feeling. You're being supported by this chair. Or maybe you're at home and you're standing. Feel the ground underneath your feet and just focus on that feeling. I'm here. I am safe. And as you do this, it really does have a calming effect. So when you're feeling that acute anxiety, you can just close your eyes, drown out the things around you, and say, I can feel myself being supported in this chair. I can feel myself being supported on the ground underneath me, and it has that calming effect. The other thing that I found myself doing earlier today was some box breathing. And you guys can do that with me now or at home. It's simply you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, you exhale for 4 seconds, and you hold it for 4 seconds. And then you just repeat 10 to 15 times. And as you do that, you can kind of start to feel yourself calming down. So let's do it. Inhale through your nose for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. See, you're already equipped to handle the next time you're starting to feel anxiety. Another thing you can do is meditation. It's very easy. You just, again, close your eyes and you focus your attention on one thing. It can be your breathing. It can be a particular word. It can be a feeling, very similar to I feel the chair underneath me. And you focus your attention on it, and you'll kind of naturally notice your attention wandering, and it's just as simple as bringing your attention back to that one object, whether it's breathing or a particular word or a particular feeling. And a good thing to do is just start doing this for about 5 minutes, and then you can increase it as needed. Another thing that's helpful, especially if you have a religious inclination, is something called contemplative prayer. And contemplative prayer is less talking to or at God and more just having an attitude of listening, kind of being silent before God. It's less about praying with people, which is great. Let me get this straight. When you pray, you can talk to God, and it's great to do that, and it's great to pray with people. But contemplative prayer is focusing on just being silent before God, and it's not being with other people. It's more about being by yourself, and it's simply seeking to come and experience the presence of God by just yielding yourself to Him. St. John of the Cross said it this way: our greatest need is to be silent before this great God. Just sit and be silent as you enter into His presence and allow that to calm and soothe your soul. Resources for suicide, some of these John went over, some of them he did not. So if you are in that situation where there is someone and you think you can't leave, because if you do, they might commit suicide, all you got to remember, if you can't, like you forgot to put the number in your phone for the Montgomery crisis or Chester County crisis number, 988. And you can have the person call, you can text, and someone is on there. You can even, maybe you're in a home that has internet, you can go to 988lifeline.org, and you can do like a chat with someone. And this is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And those people on this line are trained professionals to help you walk through someone who is contemplating suicide. So 988, just think 911, only it's 988. And there's also another national crisis text line, which is 741-741. You can text home and reach a volunteer crisis counselor. So this would be someone who's actually had experiences with issues and has gone through them and is able then to walk someone else through that difficulty. If you are just experiencing general depression, there's a 24-hour line for that as well. You can connect to 741-741, and someone will be there to help you walk through your feelings of depression and help you find other professional help, whether it's a doctor or therapist, if you would need that. Another thing that I found as I was working through this seminar is something called Living Works. It's a course on how to help identify those who are contemplating suicide, so has similar resources to PALS, not SLAP, PALS, in helping you to identify, is someone at risk for suicide? And then being able to help them find hope and help during that time. So livingworks.net. You can find courses on there that will be helpful to you. And then, as John had mentioned, the Chester County Valley Creek Crisis Center. For those of you that are here, it's on your resources page. We're going to try and figure out a way to put the resource page on the YouTube in the comments section. Montgomery County Mobile Crisis Center is here as well. Again, we're going to try and get all of these resources in your hands or on YouTube. Some outpatient counseling services. These are people that John and I know and can attest to that these are very helpful people. Langberg, Monroe, and Associates, absolutely fantastic group of professional counselors. And they have so many different experiences, and they will be able to help you walk through any issue that you might be facing. Serving Leaders Ministries, there's a really good counselor there whose name is John Sovacool, and he also works with a team of really good counselors. When I had some difficulties when I was going through the height of the pandemic, it's actually serving leaders that I reached out to and was hooked up with a counselor that was really, really beneficial to me. I don't know Ben Serlinglia, but John does, so he might be able to attest to that. And then if you know someone who has an eating disorder, you can actually go to this website, VickyTarentaCounseling.org, and you can find some helpful resources there. If you need medication and your family doctor does not feel equipped to do that, or it's a very complicated, you have a very complicated mental health condition, it's good to get a trained psychiatrist. I happen to work with John Applegate. He works with me, I should say, because he helps prescribe some of my own medication. And his number is on the screen or in the resource guide. With that, I want to just open it up for some questions and answers. John, you want to come up? John will actually be the all-star here. I'll be like, I'm not trained in this, I'm sorry. But if you have questions, if you're here, you can just raise your hand and ask a question. Or you can text the number on the screen, especially for those of you that might be tuning in at home on YouTube. You can use the number that's on the screen. It's 484-791-2598. I have received at least one question here. And John, maybe you might be able to kind of help clarify this. The person said, can you talk about the difference between unwanted, intrusive thoughts about suicide versus actually being suicidal? Is there a difference, and why is there a difference?
That's a really good question. Sometimes there is, and sometimes there's not a difference. I've worked with some people who they're suicidal, and they don't want to experience those suicidal thoughts. They are intrusive. They're popping into their mind, and they're like, "Wait, where's that coming from? I don't want that to be there." So that is the case for some people. And there's other people who suicide is enticing. It feels like a very compelling option to them. And I've had to work with some people, especially my previous job in a community residential setting, to really say, if we're going to work together, you need to take suicide as an option off the table to fixing your problems, because they can't help you if you're dead. So really, there's some people who are like, that's fine. I don't even want to do that. I don't want it to be thinking about it. And there's other people that they really have to wrestle. They're like, yeah, it feels like you're taking taking that ace up my sleeve away from me. And so I would say that kind of is one way to distinguish between those two things. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, sometimes people can have something, what we call intrusive thoughts, which are thoughts that they're not necessarily contemplating. It's just something that springs into their mind, and it's maybe it's like, hey, I should die. But it's nothing wanted. It's nothing that they're actually contemplating. It's just something that's annoying and a nuisance that keeps popping into their head. And that, for those of you that might experience that, it is normal. It's okay. And don't give that intrusive thought the light of day. Say, no, that is not what I want. I want to be here because I have this, I have that. I have a good life. And you can kind of combat those intrusive thoughts that way, or just downplay them, just like ignore them completely and go on with your life. And sometimes that can be helpful as well. And then there are people who really are contemplating suicide, and there's that intrusive thought, and that's when they're in big danger.
Yeah. That's where I mentioned DBT earlier. That's a therapy model that's really helpful in people increasing their skillfulness to tolerate distressing moments. So if someone's experiencing those intrusive thoughts, they don't want to, but they know if they can just like outlast it long enough, it'll go away. Then, some of the techniques that Josh was talking about where you're grounding yourself in your environment, trying to get yourself out of here where those thoughts are and more into your physical environment can be helpful. But DBT has like dozens of other skills that have been really useful for people that I've seen really do great work. So DBT is one therapy model that is not as one size fits all, but for some of the things we've been talking about tonight, it's really helpful in helping people gain some behavioral control over some really tough things. Sorry, that was a little clinical babble there. I apologize for slipping into that for a moment. It's helpful for people to not do what they don't want to do.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah.
All right, for those that might not be able to have heard or are on the live feed, the question was, how would you approach a teenager who has had another teenager confide in them about a serious mental health condition or even suicide, and they have asked that teenager to not share that information with anyone? What would we suggest, and what should that teenager do?
It's a great question. And, there's a couple, one thing, first of all, it's not uncommon, right? That does happen where, especially for teens, like, don't tell anyone I'm telling you this. And then that teen does feel like, oh my gosh, I'm carrying this weight all by myself, and I have to be available to talk with them late at night or be on call. It's really overwhelming. When I've been on call as a therapist, that was overwhelming for me as a trained clinician to do that. So I can't imagine for a teenager how hard that must be. And we don't want that to be the case, but maybe one way to start that conversation is just to ask, what do you think would happen if you told somebody else? Have you thought about sharing this with anyone else? And if so, if you're scared, like, what are you scared would happen? If we told your parents, what do you think their reaction would be? If you reached out to a counselor, what do you think would happen? And there's all sorts of barriers that people have to sharing, and I think it's good to unpack that and understand what that is. And then you can kind of interact with that a little bit. And so maybe, to go back to Josh's broken leg analogy earlier, maybe I would say, okay, all right, you don't want to tell anyone else, but what if I broke my leg and I wasn't going to the hospital to get treatment, and you were telling me that I should, but I said, no, don't tell anyone, and I'm just howling around, but you're the only one that knows. Like, what would you be saying to me? It's kind of a way to kind of turn the tables a little bit, help them see it in a different light, and kind of get at it as far as like, this is something that needs professional support. So that's one thing that comes to mind. If that other teenager had themselves has received mental health treatment, that might be a great time for them to share a little bit about their experience and what has been helpful, if anything has been helpful or useful about that. And anything that just kind of normalize, like, hey, you are not alone with this. Like, you do not, this goes back to the beginning of Josh's presentation, like, you don't there is nothing wrong with you that you are struggling with this way. Like there is no shame. In my eyes, there is no shame. And I know that there, in other people's eyes, there would not be shame as well. You know? Now, hey, maybe their parents really would not get it. Maybe their parents really would be invalidating. And that'd be unfortunate if that's the case. But they still might need to know, because they might need to pay for treatment, right? And that's, you know, if they might say, maybe they'll say, well, my family doesn't have the money for me to go. Well, you know, one thing, there's always a way, right? Counselors have sliding scales, meaning they can charge less for certain people. The Parents Insurance Network might have a list of counselors that are in network that accept their insurance. A licensed counselor might be able to be eligible for out-of-network benefits. There might be, if they're part of a church, that church might be willing, if they have a mercy fund, to reimburse a portion of the counseling. There's a lot of different ways to overcome whatever those barriers are. So I say it's kind of case by case, and be really important to understand what exactly is that teenager worried about that would happen if they share that. And if none of that works, it might get to a point where that other teen needs to say, listen, I'm noticing I'm losing sleep, or this is how this is starting to affect me. I'm feeling like I need extra support and help. So if I'm feeling that way, I know you're feeling that way. Why don't we together reach out for some support right now?
Very good, John. I would just say something very similar. Try to normalize it. Try to help them think about it in a new and different way. Part of the reason why we wanted to do this seminar was to help normalize mental health issues so that a teenager doesn't feel that shame. Because I'm assuming that a teenager who would go to another teenager and confide in them, it's because they feel shame. And so if we can get rid of that stigma, get rid of the issues that people might have of feeling shame or judgment because they feel a certain way, then it will be a whole lot easier for someone to reach out and get the help they need. And so if there is a way for that teenager to help normalize it and say, listen, this is normal, and just like if someone were to get hurt, I'd call an ambulance. I think we should call and get you some help. Yeah. Any other questions? It's a good one. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, for those that might not be able to have heard, the person just kind of affirmed what John was saying earlier, and that being present is so important. The person who was talking works as a chaplain at a hospital, and they commented that it is so important, and his work as a chaplain is primarily being present with people who are suffering, and also being able to notice when people are suffering and being able then to engage and become present for them. So, yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Could I just comment real quick?
Sure,
Just,
yeah.
you know, from an interpersonal neurobiology standpoint, like just some of the science really backs up what Rich was just saying. And when someone can attune to somebody else's pain, it's like another nerve. It soothes the person's nervous system. Like if we were to hook up and do some biofeedback, we would see like blood pressure coming down, heart rate lowering, cortisol levels going down. Like it's just literally our body responds to that. I'm nervous before this talk, and before I leave home, my wife gives me a hug, right? And that has a co-regulating effect on me. Like I literally feel that tension go away. And that's a little bit of what happens when we sit with someone and enter in and tune into them. It's actually fascinating what happens. I could talk a lot more about that, but I'll stop for now.
All right. I just would say, yeah, while I was struggling with depression and anxiety during the height of the pandemic, one of the things that was most helpful, medication was great, therapy was great, counseling was great, but when I would just be able to go and give my wife a very long, sustained hug, I could just feel the anxiety like leaving my body. It was very regulating. Any other questions? It's getting late, so I will let you go home. If you don't mind, we are in a church. It's a house of prayer. So I am just going to close us in prayer. Gracious God, I thank you that you care deeply about each and every one of us. God, that you have taught us what it means to be present. And you have come to be with us. Your name, Emmanuel, God with us, present with us, experiencing the same suffering and being willing to go with us into suffering. Lord, we just thank you for that. We thank you, God, that you can bring healing to both spirit and body. I pray that you might just do that you might bless those who are listening here and on the internet, and that you might calm their heart and soothe them right now. And I pray that if people need help, that you would just kind of urge them to do that, to reach out and find help. And Lord, that you would be magnified and glorified through all of this. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Have a good night.